peace faculty, addiction medicine. I do a lot of diversity equity work in the medical school itself. I'm one of the co-directors of this specific Project ECHO on race equity in opiate use. Cedric Weatherspoon, he's not here right now, but hopefully he'll join us later. He's my co-director for this group. This specific Project ECHO that happens on the second Wednesday at noonish of the month is about presenting stories, lived experiences, particularly from the community, to us as health professionals and how we can better engage and understand what's happening in the community. Today, we are focusing on the East African community, particularly Somali community. And so I have the privilege of having Zuhur and Abdirahman involved in this conversation here today. Just to let you know, we will have other echoes coming up on this community too. So though it's getting recorded here, I think there will be opportunities for you to interact with other individuals too. And I love having people here in the Zoom because this is where you can ask questions. Recordings are nice. If you can't make it, it's asynchronous because our schedules are so busy. But having this space where you can connect and talk to people is great too. Other than that, I'm gonna leave it to Zuhur and Abdirahman, and they can do their thing. If you have questions, you can certainly put it in chat, but it's their show now. You want to unmute yourself, Zuhur?
Oh, I always forget to do that. It's gonna get some time to get used to this Zoom thing. I still prefer live, but thank you so much, Pooh, and thank you all for attending. I hope we will be at least able to give you some basic information and hopefully answer all of your questions. I think the way we're gonna do this part on is I'll give you just kind of a general overview of the history of East Africa, specifically the Somali community and how they make it to Minnesota. I think it's the $1,000,000 question. How do these people from this nice hot weather place end up to the most miserably cold place on earth? And there is some interesting facts to it. And then I'll pass it to Abdirahman Mukhtar, who will be talking to us about East African communities, especially Somali community, and opioid addiction and use, and the story that's attached to that. So as some of you or many of you might know, there was a civil war in Somalia. Somalis, with the help of refugee resettlement organizations, made it to the US. What's really interesting is Somalis didn't come only in the 1990s. There was a war between Ethiopia and Somalia, and Somalia used to be 5 regions, but the colonies divided into these 5 regions. It used to be one big place. It used to be the northern Somaliland, Ethiopian Somaliland, or the British Somaliland, Italy Somaliland, what in 1963 called the North Frontier Somaliland, and the Ogadennian region of Ethiopia. So a good chunk of it was given to Ethiopia, a good chunk of it was given to Kenya, a good chunk of it was a French colony. It's called Djibouti now, it's a country on its own. And then the UK kept a chunk for itself, and then Italy kept a chunk of itself. So later on, what became Somalia as we know it now was the British colony, previous colony, and the Italy colony that joined together in 1960 and decided to become one country. In 1977, there was a war between Ethiopia and Somalia in dispute of that land that was given to Ethiopia by the colony. So what that did is, obviously, whenever there's a war, there's people that are displaced from their home. So there were refugees, Somali refugees that were resettled from that region, that were resettled into the U.S. and they were resettled in San Diego, California. So first Somalis, you can say, obviously there were Somalis before that came as a student or for other purposes, but first refugee Somalis were settled in San Diego, and that's where the large community was up until early mid 90s, when we start to see more in the Midwest area. And actually, a really good friend of mine wrote this amazing book called Somalis in Minnesota. It's very easy to read. It's short, but it gives a really nice, and this is what I use to get a lot of historical facts. But he has a really interesting way of explaining that whole history in here. But how Somalis made it to Minnesota was there was a company, a poultry company. A lot of people think that Somalis came here for welfare or anything like that. Actually, no. They came here for job opportunities. There were 4 guys, according to his research here, that lived in North Dakota. And there was an ad in a North Dakota newspaper looking for a poultry company called Heartland, I think it's called, Heartland Food Company that was based in Marshall, Minnesota, posted an ad in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, newspaper, and the 4 Somali guys saw it there. So they right away went to Marshall, Minnesota, and they were hired on the spot. And the manager told them, bring some of your friends. So what they did, they picked up the phone and they called their friends in San Diego and said, guess what? There's a job. It's paying $6.95 an hour, and they're hiring right away. So 3 guys from San Diego flew from there and said, hey, let's go check it out. And the rest is history. So in 1990s and 91, Somalis were resettled every other state, according to this book, but Minnesota, Arizona, Kentucky, Georgia, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Missouri, Nebraska, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, Virginia, Wisconsin, even Wisconsin, but Minnesota. So what brought Somalis in Minnesota? It was that job opportunity over at Marshall's. And that's how they end up here. And the rest is history. I think I'll leave it there, and I'll pass it over to Abdirahman, because I really want to give you guys, I think it's just nice to know how do they make it and who are the Somali people. Obviously they speak Somali language, but for instance, Somalis that are from the Djibouti country speak French. That's kind of one of the main language, and they speak Somali. Somalis over at Kenya would speak Swahili and Somali. Somalis over at Ethiopia will speak the Amharic and Somali. So Somalis kind of are diverse. They live in a lot of places in the world. And they're people that are constantly looking for opportunity, and they're looking for ways to, better themselves, as a lot of communities do. A lot of refugees and a lot of immigrant communities are extremely resilient, and they're always trying to find a way to better themselves and better their community. So with that being said, there are still those challenges that some of us face, and opioid is one of those challenges that are, that are facing the Somali community. So I'll pass it over to Abdirahman to tell us more about that. I think you need to unmute yourself, Abdirahman.
Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? Can you hear me?
Yes, good afternoon.
Okay, good afternoon. Can you also see my screen?
Yes, it's great.
Okay, thank you. So again, my name is Abdirahman Mukhtar. Zuhur and I actually knew each other for a long time. We went same high school and also college. One of the reasons that some of the Somali community members moved to Minnesota is actually why I moved to Minnesota. So when I came to the US, I was in San Diego, California. That's where I arrived, and that's where my family were living. Actually, my sister were one of the first few people who arrived in San Diego in December of '92. But the reason I end up in Minnesota is to get an education. In California, they don't allow you to stay in high school after you become 18 years old. You have to graduate high school when you are 18 or younger, but in Minnesota, you are allowed to stay in high school until you're 21 years old. And because of that reason, that extra 3 years, I moved to Minnesota to get an education. So there's so many other reasons other than the employment that also Minnesota is a reunion state, which means if I come to Minnesota as a refugee or an immigrant, I can sponsor my family to join me. But a lot of other families relocated from other states because of the education and the employment opportunities. And one of the main reasons actually some of these families moved here where early on we had professional Somali teachers who in back home used to teach universities, who used to be deans of universities, people who used to write the curriculum and the textbooks. Were teaching high schools and middle schools here in Minnesota. Those were the only jobs they can get at that time. And because of that, a lot of parents wanted their kids to take advantage of and enroll their schools where they had bilingual, highly educated Somali teachers. So again, my name's Abdirahman Mukhtar, and I do wear so many hats, but today I'm wearing my Daryeel Youth hat. By profession, I work for the city of Minneapolis Back and Rec. I also own and publish a bilingual Somali and English newspaper called Two Small Times. It's a digital, also print that comes once a month. But in 2018, so for over 20 years, I've done youth work, and my passion is working with young people. So that's what I did for a living. And because of my work for my passion working with youth, I've noticed it. We were having a lot of challenge, a lot of problems with our kids, with our young people. And some of the challenges that we had at that time is that mostly we're dealing with gun violence, and we're dealing with other truants and runaway issues, conflict between parents and young people. We were having so many issues that normally young people will have. But our number one challenge were actually gun violence and homicide. And 2018 was really, 2008 was really a bad year for my community. We lost so many young people due to gun violence. And because of my passion and my experience of working with young people and their families, I was able to bridge the gap between parents and young people. I was able to speak in Somali language, and at the same time, because of my experience in going high school here and college, I was able to relate to some of the young people. So because of that, in 2018, when I left direct youth service, I received an email regarding overdose among the East African youth, specifically Somali youth. And that was 2018, late summer 2018. And at that time, the email I've received informed me that there were a lot of young adults, mostly male, who were ending up Hennepin County ER and Fairview Riverside ER for overdoses. My community was not aware of that. And because of the relationship that I had with young people, and because I was living in City Riverside neighborhood at that time, I tried to find out what's going on and what is happening. And what I found out is that most of the drugs that at that time these young people were using were K2, the synthetic marijuana K2. That was some of the main reason they were ending up in the emergency room. So when I spoke with the young people, and everyone kept telling me that the community don't care about us. No one really cares, about us. And because at that time I left direct youth service, and I knew normally the traditional after school program in this country is normally 3 to 8. At 8 o'clock, most of the school programs, recreation centers, other spaces that young people hang out, they close at 8, specifically in Cedar Riverside neighborhood. So from 8 o'clock, then you see tons of young people, specifically young adults, who will hang out in Cedar Riverside and Cedar by the business area. And because when I found out, then I decided to do something about this addiction and this overdose. And what I decided to do at that time is that I started an initiative called Daryeel Youth. Since young people were telling me no one cares about us, the community don't care about us, the word Daryeel means care. So I wanted to show that there's people who actually care about you, the people that love you. So I started, because I'm a father of 5. I have so I'm very busy. I have a full-time job. I have my newspaper that I write. I do so many things in my community. So, and in that email that I received, I found out between 8 to 10 is when a lot of the overdoses are taking place. So I started the Real Street outreach program, a volunteer initiative on Fridays. So from October 2018 until now, last 4 years, you will find me in Cedar Riverside every Friday from 8 to 10, standing that corner, rain or shine. In order to find out what is happening, I cannot go around and ask young people, what is your drug of choice? Why are you overdosing? What's going on? That was not a good way to do that. But because of my background with youth work, it's about relationship and trust. It's about being consistent and showing up for these young people every day. And every Friday, I bring pizza, cheese. That's the only kind cheese, and I also bring Somali tea. And Somali, I mean, tea brings conversation, but the tea and the pizza is really to attract them to come and get that pizza. But we continue. The goal is really that human connection, giving them hack when they're high, when they're drunk, and just it really doesn't matter what situation they are. Just asking them, how you doing today? Did you eat? Grab a tea, grab a pizza, and so it just kind of it sounds weird, but being at that corner every Friday and bring the pizza. Elders and community members will ask me, are you selling something? Why are you here? What's going on? I mean, why are you here even during the winter? So, but the goal is really to reach out to young people and connect them to resources. One of my greatest assets is really knowing where the resources are in my community and knowing who to call, who to connect to. So because of that, when I'm out there, if I find out what these young people need, then I can do that. So another challenge is that our youth don't consider themselves homeless or unhoused. They don't use that terminology. They sometimes will stay with friends. They sleep, they stairs in the high rises, behind businesses. A few years ago, before the COVID-19, sometimes they'll take the light rail at midnight and stay there, but they change the schedule now. So they move around a lot. They don't consider themselves homeless. So and that also became another challenge. So moving to the Somali culture, tradition, and people and heritage. So I'm gonna use these pictures, but the Somali culture, is shaped by three things. Religion is number one, history and lifestyle. And in this topic, the most important thing that really shapes in our culture when it comes to addiction and substance use is the religion. So Islam is the primary religion in Somalia, and majority of us, I will say every one of us mostly are Sunni Muslims. And almost all our social norms and attitudes, customs, gender roles, everything comes from that Islamic tradition. We follow, and our faith is actually it shapes what we do every day. It's even the jobs that we can do sometimes. It really shapes who we are, and because of that, substance use is considered sin in Islam. Also, it's a taboo subject to talk about in my culture. When you add that to that, you have young girls, females who are drowning behind the veil, who are basically doing drugs, alcohol, those things. But you see, like Zuhur now, she's wearing the scarf. So they're normal. They wear the scarf, they wear the veil, but behind that, they're dealing with mental illness. They're dealing with substance abuse and addiction. And for young men, it's easy to identify because the way they dress, and they stand at the corner in the neighborhood. You can easily see that. But for females, it's hard to see that unless they end up in that corner. Also, another challenge that we have is that in my culture in Somalia, khat, or it's also called khat, is the drug of choice in back home. And the sad thing is that this is actually a drug, but in my country, this is legal. People don't see this as a drug. They don't consider this as a drug. There's a lot of single moms, there's a lot of business, both men and women, who sell, this is their livelihood. They sell this every day. Everyone uses this, but they don't consider this. Some of the people that use alcohol in back home is illegal, so they hide that. So they find a way to bring that to it's a Muslim country. And generally, they don't acknowledge and they don't talk about other drugs, even though they exist, but no one talks about that. It's not the same as the khat. And so the picture that you see, if you see the lower picture, that's what it looks like when it comes to the US, because it's illegal in the US. And when people bring to the US illegally, this is how it looks like. And sometimes definitely it's a legal drug people bring to Minnesota and other places. Actually, there was a seizure, actually border control and Seattle police, I think, caught a large drug in Seattle almost about a year ago. I think that it was the largest illegal seizure in the US. So it still comes to the US. So our parents then are used to doing khat. That's normal to them. They'll bring home. They don't see nothing wrong with that. It's not a stigma. You don't talk about that. Alcohol and anything else, you hide that. And so because of that, the drug of choice or substance use of choice for young people here in Minnesota mostly used to be alcohol, and the alcohol was for the older. I mean, when I say older, mostly older youth, I cannot say young people, but the older generation, like my age, who came here in their teens, their choice of substance use were alcohol. They will use alcohol heavily. For the younger generation who grew up here, who went elementary, middle school, high school here, they were doing marijuana. Before these synthetics, before the K2, before the opioid crisis, that used to be. And then people like me who work with young people or parents, you can actually smell alcohol and you can smell marijuana. And this is the challenge with opioid. Unless you know how it smells, you really cannot tell that. And people are creative, and most of the young people who died overdose in this opioid crisis in my community either died in their car or at home in their bedroom or in their bathroom at home. Unless they went to the ER at the hospital and they died at the hospital, but the three locations mostly they die is either their car or a friend's car or their bed or bathroom. And because of that, parents will say, oh, my child died of heart attack or other things. They're still in denial. They don't want to say, I mean, you guys health professionals, doctors, you know, a 15-year-old will not die of heart attack, and unless there's other health risk, other health issues. But that's the challenge that we have. But so 2018, when I started Daryeel Youth, standing at that corner, 2019 was really a very hard year for us. We lost a lot of young people to the for fentanyl, specifically the synthetic fentanyl, and because of that, some of the young people started breaking their silence of addiction when they saw losing their friends, and so we hosted exactly so October of 2019. October 20th, we hosted a community meeting at the Brian Coyle Center to talk about this, because we were losing so many young people at that time. We had a community conversation, and some of the young people came forward to talk about their addiction. And that was the first time we've seen young people in my community really coming forward and speaking about their addiction. They will not talk about other traumas or mental, illnesses and other problems, but they did talk about their addiction, specifically with fentanyl. And so this will be, and I will send this to Katie, but these are a few articles that you can read about Daryeel and the work that I do. But so when this took place, then what happened is that then COVID-19 came. So while we're in the middle of this pandemic and dealing with this opioid crisis, then COVID-19 started, everything shut down. And then the idea of kind of talking about the opioid crisis and having community meetings and starting educating parents and young people, everything stopped. So that also led more young people to start using this synthetic drug. And because of that, I know the whole country is dealing with the opioid crisis, but it's different in my community because this was something new to us. And before this, the other public health challenge or the pandemic or epidemic that we had was actually gun violence. So we moved from young people from my community killing each other, shooting each other daily, to this pandemic where parents really don't know And it's not only kids who are on the corner. It's not only kids who are, we call them at risk or, bad kids. No, we have young people who are going to college, young people who we considered good kids actually dying for this overdose. And they were dying at home. And so parents, they really did not, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know who to go to. And because of that, luckily, we had few Somali professionals who started their own clinics, but also recovery centers where the parents at least can take their kids to. But we also started seeing mostly both male and females, Somali females who are in recovery, who recovered from addiction, who are not only hiding, but they started their own initiatives to come out and say recovery is possible, and there's help available. And so I think even though we lost so many young people for this silent killer, we're very fortunate. For now, I can say that at least we have people who are willing to talk about that stigma and the shaming of this. It's not only the addiction, but also in general, what mental health challenge looks like, what addiction looks like. And I think every other week or, at least once a month, you will see a community event regarding mental health or mental illness awareness or addiction awareness, which is huge. We didn't had that before. So that's a quick overview of what is happening in my community. We really don't have exact numbers of how many young people died of, overdose, specifically fentanyl overdose. But the number of young people who are addicted to this drug is growing by the day, because I'm on the street and I see that. I'm seeing new faces every Friday. And I'm not only seeing East Africans, I'm also seeing other younger native Caucasian African Americans, Latinos, who are at that corner in City Riverside neighborhood where I do the Daryeel Youth. So at this point, I think I will let, if you guys have any questions, I will open to this, but I will also let Zuhur, if she wants to add anything, she can add it.
Well, thank you so much, Abdirahman Mukhtar. I think you give a really good background. And I want to open up to your questions, because the goal here is to kind of make sure that we get some sort of a general sense. But I just have two questions for you, Abdirahman, before, and to the group, if anyone is interested in adding to this. You've mentioned that religion is one of the main things that we need to account for when we're having this discussion, because substance use is a sin, and because of that, it becomes problematic when it comes to identifying who's using whatnot, because it's a sin. You're not supposed to be doing it anyways, and it creates a taboo within the community. And you've also mentioned how girls more than boys are harder to even identify, because a lot of young people that are using, that are ODing, look normal. They're your average kids, good kids that are go to school. They dress normal. They don't give that general. They don't have the general characteristics that we see with someone who might have a heavy substance abuse. What could we do? And then you mentioned that parents are in denial because they know their kid is a good kid. They go to college or school. They listen to them. They do their chores. They don't have a bad behavior. So what are some ways that we can, with the help of providers, to explain what to look for and what to do? What are ways that we can, educate the parents? Would it help to, I don't know, maybe have providers show up at Friday sermons and educate the community about, okay, you might have a normal, perfect child who's still struggle with substance abuse, and this is what you should look for. And this is also a question to the providers. Are there things that a parent would, know or see that are changed from their behaviors? And also it's important to account that a lot of the Somali families are large families. We're talking about an average of 6 to 10 kids. So it's hard to really know. I have one kid that's keeping me busy. I don't know how they do it. They're superheroes. But how do you pay attention to that one child? What behaviors? It's a loaded 10 million questions in one. So Abdirahman, I'll let you address that, and then I'll open the floor if providers want to jump in and address that, or if they have other questions. The floor is open.
Yeah, thank you, Zuhur. It's really very challenging for providers to sometimes find ways to educate parents unless that topic comes up, and unless the reason parents end up at that session or that hospital is drug related overdose. But I think one thing that providers can do is educate the parents about the connection between mental illness and addiction. A lot of times when I talk to young people and ask them, how do you get into the drugs? What led you, start doing drugs? They'll tell me that, I was sitting next to my friend, or I was standing at the corner when someone shot us and my friend died. Because of that, I sometimes blame myself. Why am I leaving and my friend is the one who died? So that guilt and that trauma, and they don't talk about too. And this is what I said, there's a lot of young people who we only talk about the ones who died of overdose or the ones who died of gun violence, but we don't talk about the ones who survived, because they have that guilt. Why am I the one who survived? Why am I still alive, and why my friends are not here anymore? So I think that trauma and mental health, mental illness, and the connection to substance abuse, I think it's a topic that you can start and find a ways to make that connection. But also, if you provide services, the best way is that don't wait the community to come to you. It's better if you're out there when there's a community events happening, when there are things that happen in the community, go out and network with the community. If you have a table, attend the meeting or the community event. So share your resources with the community. By the time they come to you, they're already familiar with you. You'll have someone who is also in this field, someone who can help you with this. Because at the end of the day, both the parents and young people are crying for help and they don't know what to do. And
I'm glad you mentioned the link between depression and mental health, because a lot of mental health and depression is so downplayed by parents, because parents have went through civil war and their own trauma that's huge and big to them. And they don't believe, and I think to them, a child saying who lives in America, who has all of this luxurious life, in the parents' view, is what do you have to complain about? How can you even be depressed? You should be thankful that you live in this country, that you were born here, that you did not see your own child or brother or sister murdered in front of you. We have been through bigger trauma. How dare you? And I have had these conversations with my own parents when I felt a little blue, like, what do you have to? You shouldn't even, we're Muslims, you shouldn't even be depressed. How dare you be depressed? So that is a really huge, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a really big part of the equation, is downplaying their own mental health, their own depression, their own suffering, whatever that they have to go through. And that's the big gap between the parents or the older generation and the younger generation, is they have their own trauma that they experience. They have their own issues and mental health and depression and all of that. And it could even be a historical trauma that's giving to them. But I'm glad you brought that up.
thank you.
There are some
Anyone
questions in the
else?
chat too, so if you want to address that. It looks like Jessica asked, how does the community perceive medication-assisted treatment?
Yeah, so medication that have something to do with mental illness or mental diagnosis is very challenging because we really don't have a terminology for depression or an anxiety. In my culture, you're either crazy or normal, and which is very challenging. And because of the misinformation and the lack of knowledge, most people will say, if I take this medicine, it will make me crazy. It will make me much worse than I am now. And parents will hesitate that. When you tell this medicine can help you, they believe in spiritual healing, which is, it's a really a good thing. Like I said, our religion shapes who we are. Things are getting better because of, I'm seeing, I think because of the pandemic, because of the COVID-19 and what we went through last 2 years, because of all the virtual Zoom meetings, I'm seeing my community talking about mental illness and addiction in a way I have never seen before, which is a good thing, but we still have a long way to go. Some people will accept that, but the majority of parents will hesitate. Young people read and they understand about depression and anxiety, but their parents will say no. So it depends who you are prescribing that medicine to. And it's very helpful just to, before you prescribe that medicine, just to talk about the options. You can say, you can still continue with your spiritual healing, whatever that works for you to ground yourself, to take care of yourself. But this will also help. And this is what it will do. These are the benefits of if you take this. And I think if you break it down for them and you say, you may hear, other things about this, but just kind of you normalize, mental illness being the same as if you came for a cold or a COVID or anything. So it just depends the relationship you have with that patient. And sometimes what I also know that most parents don't speak English language, so you always have someone else interpreting for them, and they play a huge role in that. So sometimes you also have that gap of misunderstanding, and that's another challenge as well. So thank you.
And I think the question about the studies has been answered. Thank you, Naomi. Yeah, I mean, not that I know of, but I think Naomi knows more about it, and I haven't looked at it. It would be interesting to do something around that. It would be definitely an interesting study.
I think Ryan had a question too, and then we can throw it to Allison next after this.
I think Abdirahman, you pretty much answered my question. If I'm talking to someone about medications for opioid use disorder like Suboxone or methadone, there's a lot of stigma and bias that if you take a medicine that you stop taking and get sick, isn't that replacing one addiction with another? And so in some communities, I'll kind of make an analogy to depression, how, a medication for depression, if you stop taking before your brain heals, the depression comes back. And your point, and Zuhur's point, is that doesn't work in certain people who kind of came up with a different belief system on health. And so you already made the point that really it's an individualized conversation. But does kind of making an analogy to other medical conditions that people do take medications for work? Like, for example, if someone has high blood pressure, some people with exercise and diet don't need medicines or don't always need medicines, but sometimes no matter how hard someone works, they need extra support. And that's what these medications do. Do you think that would hit home to families of people who, have someone struggling with opioids?
Yes, absolutely. I think using that analogy and breaking down for them and using clear and concise, simple language will go a long way. And in my culture, we use analogy a lot. If we are giving someone a direction, it's easier to say the building or the structure that is close to where they're going instead of the street and the exact location. So if you use the same analogy in this case, and like you did mention blood pressure, I think that will hit home. And just to say, look, I know some people do yoga, some people do other ways to take care of themselves. You can still continue with your spiritual healing, but this is also something that can help you. And what I'm seeing also is that when some of these young people end up in recovery, and they'll be away about 3 or 6 months, families don't have a plan for them when they come out. So they don't kind of change that environment for them. They don't have something that they can do to keep them busy. Or so when these young people come back, they just come back to the same environment, same friends, same corner. It's very tempting. So just kind of the medicine aspect, parents, specifically Somali parents, will do everything for their child. But because of that stigma, because of the misinformation and the lack of knowledge about medicine and what it could do, but also the lack of knowledge about mental illness, sometimes the doctors or the health providers have to do a little bit of explaining. It helps to go that extra mile. Thank you.
Allison, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. This was so informative. Thank you so much for being here. I have a question sort of about stigma and destigmatization and language. And I feel like a lot of the work that I do relates to reducing stigma so that, people can feel like they can access help and they won't be shamed for it. And, so that sort of self-empowerment piece. But I know you talked about how substance use is seen as a sin. And I want to validate a patient's experience and tell them it's normal and you're not inherently bad if you're using substances. But I also at the same time really don't want to minimize some of their core beliefs and religious values and things like that. So I'm wondering how you might suggest how do those intersect, and is there room for that sort of destigmatization work? And if so, how does that look in conjunction with religion? You have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think again, so for me, I've never done drugs or alcohol. So sometimes it's when people ask me, if you have never had that experience, how are you able to work with these young people who are dealing with addiction? And I always tell them it's about compassion and care. So I'm here to show them that I care about them, and I'm here to show them that you will not do this alone. I'm here to help you along the way. And sometimes they need someone that believes in them, someone who's not gonna stigmatize them or shame them. And that's why the PC and the T, for example, everyone else is seeing I'm giving PC and T, but they don't know the conversation I'm having with them. It's personal level. I'm talking, they feel comfortable talking to me about their addiction. How many pills they taking, how many fentanyl, what they doing, how many times they OD'd. They will not share that with anyone else. So that stigma piece, even though culturally is using drugs or alcohol is seen a taboo or as a sin, but you can say, some people are addicted to food, some people are addicted to other things. So using an analogy and saying, look, there's a trauma, there's something that is causing this person to use this, whether it's alcohol or whatever substance they're using. But there's also recovery is possible, and there's a way to get there. So if you can just a little bit talk about, this is where we are now, but down the road where we want to get to is to help this person with this problem. And to do that, it helps to acknowledge there's a problem. And if you don't acknowledge that, then it just, the cycle continues. So just kind of just breaking down that in a way that they can understand, because don't assume they understand what depression is or anxiety is. Like I said, we don't have those things in those terminology in our language. I think the closest to depression is Bofis. Zuhur can explain this to me, but I don't know what Bofis is. I mean, Zuhur, you can add that too. So we literally don't have medical terminology or words for anxiety and for depression. The only thing that we know is that you're either crazy or you're a normal person. And to then move from that, only those two things, normal or crazy, I think it's helpful just to talk about what mental illness is, and simplify whatever they're dealing with that. And the medication and the first step of getting help is really to acknowledge there's a problem. And I think that's why parents sometimes will acknowledge if they see that you're listening. But at the beginning, they will be in denial because, like I said, you also have someone who is interpreting for them. They're not telling you in their own words what the challenge is. Someone else is translating for them or interpreting for them. That's not an easy too as well, because when you allow someone to speak in their own language, the fact that they're speaking about that is also a therapy. It helps for them to express how they're feeling and what they're dealing with. So I don't know if that's helpful, but really just kind of use whatever analogy that you can use, and don't be afraid to talk about that, but just try to simplify for them.
Well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I just want to add one comment to what Abdirahman Mukhtar said regarding Ellison. And in that same comment, I want to answer Dana's question. And that comment is I think with destigmatization, we really need to hit hard with parents. Because, I mean, we need to hit hard with both groups, the youth, the young people, and the kids, but the parent is the most important part in that we need to teach them and educate parents about their own trauma, what they've went through. And we need to let them know that it is okay to be Muslim, to be Somali, to be the strong person that you are who survived civil wars and survived all kinds of things, and to still, feel depressed, feel blue, and what that looks like, what that, is, and also to say, this is the type of things your child could go through. This is, ways for them to accept that mental illness exists, depression exists, opioid crisis exists, addiction exists, and the faster they can accept that, the better to early detect that with their child's type of behaviors and signals and things like that they're showing off. So I think that's the best way to educate the parents, to really teach them how to accept it for themselves, to let that out, that repression, and to also teach them how to detect their own children's depressions and emotions and feelings.
Miigwech, thank you.
Do we have time if I ask a question?
Oh, I was going to try to slow down. Okay.
Is that okay? Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
So I've worked with some Somali clients, and what I've found is that the word like depression doesn't go by so well. I don't know if it translates well. I was told that there's a translation for depression that actually is almost a negative connotation. And so what I've used instead is just the word stress, that I use stress and I use worry. And I've been able to at least, get into the door of conversation, as opposed to when I've used depression or more clinical terms like that. I get, a blank look, and then I just get deflected, and everything becomes alhamdulillah, and inshallah, and so it's hard to get in. But if I use stress, right, and I've been able to kind of get in. Has anybody, the experts, right? Is there any logic around my experience, and do you have more to say about that?
I would say, I got a quick question. Is there any support for parents? I'm piggybacking off of yours, Doug.
Okay.
Is it any support for parents? Because usually, like if parents, from my experiences, when parents have a child who's not doing well, it's taken very personal. Like it's like, I'm a bad person. What this? Why is this all happening to me? And what I found is, like, there's not I don't have a lot of, I haven't professionally had resources for them to kind of process the grief of them trying to help their kid with opioid addiction or any kind of drug addiction. Are there any resources?
That's a great question. I honestly don't think there's enough or any parent support system in place. In some cases, I get a lot of phone calls, parents who are looking for help. But it's tough sometimes when you don't have a program that specifically supports parents, and everyone else is focusing on recovery and helping young people deal with their addiction, but we don't have a parent support. One of the things that I started doing is we started having a community well-being initiative where we use Somali culture, like Somali music and storytelling, and within the Somali culture, we have a Somali folklore dance called Brambur. Mostly females do the Brambur. They use the drum, and normally that happens in during weddings or celebrations. So I started doing smaller groups for moms to dance and use that, and then talk about their feeling and what their challenge is. For young people, I'm using sometimes DJ or a spoken word for them to express their own experience. So I'm trying to be creative on my end, but I cannot say I'm supporting parents, and I have a program to support parents, and I don't know any other program that's supporting parents. We have people who came out, who recovered, who are trying to help young people get into recovery. But to answer your question, it's a long story, but there's no any specific program that's consistently helping parents with this addiction problem or educating them.
Well, it is 1:15, where we're past that time, so we're at the end of Echo. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Really appreciate both of you sharing today on a very hard topic for the community at this point. And clearly people have a lot of great questions and things that we can do better. Pete, thank you for your statement in the chat too. I'm going to just say one quick question, and then we can all sign off, is what is the one thing that us as healthcare providers can do at this very point in time? You're talking about a lot of relational stuff to help you in your work you're doing right now.
I think my work is a volunteer work. We actually received about a month ago our 510C. So I'm structuring this as a nonprofit organization, but I do this because I have a full-time job. I have family to take care of. So one of the things that can help me is if you know resources and programs that can help these families. One of my biggest assets is really, I know how to connect parents to resources. If you share with me those resources, I'll be sharing with parents, young people, community members, because they reach out to me. When they need help, they will give me a call and say, do you know who can help me, or a program, or anyone who can help me with this? So, and the other thing is that everyone is welcome to join me on Fridays and actually talk to these young people. I was planning to have some of these young people, one of them who is dealing with the opioid addiction, to come with me today. Unfortunately, he was not able to make it, but I wanted to surprise you and bring someone with me so you can hear from them. But you are welcome to, volunteer with me and talk to these young people and find out exactly, as a provider, how you can help them. So whatever resources that you can think, I can connect with families and young people. I think that's how you can help.
Great. I'm ready for some Somali tea and pizza anytime. So that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us. Every Wednesday at noonish, the second Wednesday of the month, you are welcome to join us next week. Cedric is going to bring a crew together specifically on the African-American community and opiate use too. So I want to sign off. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of the fall here today. Take care,
Thank you.
everyone.
Have a good day. Thank you, everyone.